The snowstorm outside was supposed to lock us safely in the warmth of our family Christmas celebration. But something out there didn't care about the storm. It cared about us. 3 true Skinwalker Christmas horror stories. It was Christmas Eve, and our family cabin, nestled deep in the forest, felt like the perfect escape. Snow piled up outside, creating a blanket of silence over the woods. Inside, the glow of the fireplace and the twinkling lights of the tree made everything feel cozy, safe, and festive. My younger sibling sat by the window, eagerly scanning the skies for Santa, while the rest of us shared stories and sipped hot chocolate. As the night went on, the storm picked up. Wind howled against the windows, shaking the trees outside. We laughed nervously about how we were stuck until morning, the roads buried under fresh snow. It was then that we heard the first sound, crunching footsteps in the snow just outside the cabin. We all paused, exchanging glances. My dad dismissed it, saying it was probably just a deer, but my mom's expression told a different story. Still, we brushed it off and went back to our festivities. But the noises didn't stop. Heavy, deliberate footsteps circled the cabin, crunching the snow with a rhythm that seemed too steady, too intentional for an animal. I peeked out the window, but the blizzard made it impossible to see more than a few feet. Then my sibling gasped, pointing to a dark figure in the distance. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and moving slowly, just beyond the edge of the tree line. "Probably a hiker," Dad said, though his voice lacked conviction. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, promising to check things out. We huddled by the door, watching him scan the snowy woods. He called out, but there was no reply. When he came back inside, his face was pale. "There's nothing out there," he said quietly. "But the tracks." "What about them?" Mom asked. "They're huge, bigger than a person's, and they go all the way around the cabin." The atmosphere shifted. We turned off the music, turned up the fire, and bolted the doors. Despite the warmth inside, an oppressive chill settled over us. The footsteps continued throughout the night, now closer, their pacing more erratic. Sometimes it sounded like the figure was running, other times it seemed to stop right outside the windows. Then the scratching started. At first it was faint, barely noticeable over the wind, but it grew louder, more deliberate. It moved along the walls, like claws dragging across the wood. We tried to act brave for my sibling, but fear gripped us all. My mom whispered prayers under her breath while my dad stood by the door with a fire poker, his knuckles white. Around midnight, the scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence. We thought maybe it was over, that whatever it was had gone. Then there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "No one opens that door," Dad hissed, his voice trembling. We sat frozen, staring at the door as it knocked again, 3 times, louder. My sibling began to cry softly. My mom held them close, her eyes darting between us and the locked door. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something in between. We stayed awake until dawn, huddled together, too terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, the noises stopped, and the world outside was eerily quiet. Cautiously, we opened the door. The tracks were gone. The snow was untouched, as if nothing had been there at all. But deep gouges marred the door. Long, jagged claw marks etched into the wood. We never spent Christmas at the cabin again. If you're enjoying, please remember to like and subscribe for more. We thought our Christmas caroling tradition would bring joy, but that year, it brought something far darker, an echo of our song that didn't belong to us. Every Christmas Eve, my friends and I would bundle up, armed with songbooks and lanterns, and head out to carol around our small mountain town. It was the kind of tradition you see in holiday movies, where the streets are lined with glowing lights, and people greet you warmly at their doors. But this year was different. A storm had passed through earlier in the day, leaving the streets eerily empty, and the houses felt darker, less inviting. Still, we were determined. Our group, 6 of us, started at the more festive homes, where people smiled and clapped as we sang classics like Silent Night and Deck the Halls. But as we moved further into the outskirts of town, the atmosphere changed. The houses were fewer, spaced farther apart, and many of them didn't even have lights in the windows. The last house on our list was on the very edge of town, at the foot of the forest. It was old, with peeling paint and sagging shutters, but someone had put a single flickering candle in the window. It was enough to draw us in. "Are you sure?" I asked, glancing at my friend who held the list. "Come on, it's Christmas Eve," she said with a shrug. "What's the worst that could happen?" We trudged up the creaking steps and knocked. There was no answer, but the door swung open slightly, revealing a dark hallway. The air that wafted out was cold and smelled faintly of mildew. "Let's just sing and go," someone whispered. We began with Silent Night. Our voices carried through the stillness, soft at first, then growing louder as we tried to shake off the creeping unease. As we reached the second verse, I thought I heard something. A faint echo, like someone singing along just a beat behind us. I faltered, looking around at my friends. They looked just as uneasy, but we kept singing, determined to finish. By the time we reached the last verse, the echo was unmistakable. It wasn't us, and it wasn't coming from inside the house, it was coming from the woods. We stopped singing, and the echo stopped too. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind through the trees. Then it started again. Our song, but wrong. It was distorted, the notes drawn out too long, the words slurred, as if someone, or something, was mimicking us, but didn't quite know how. "Let's go," one of my friends whispered urgently. We hurried back down the steps and into the street, our lanterns swinging wildly. But the voice followed. It grew louder, the echo twisting into something almost taunting. When we reached the edge of the forest, I made the mistake of looking back. Between the trees, I saw a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its mouth was open wide, but the sound it made didn't match its movements. It was singing, or trying to. We ran. The street seemed darker now, and the warmth of the town felt impossibly far away. The mimicry followed us, growing louder, more distorted, until it felt like the sound was coming from inside our heads. When we finally reached the safety of my house, we bolted the door and collapsed onto the floor, panting. The singing had stopped. For a while, none of us spoke, too shaken to make sense of what had happened. The next morning, Christmas Day, we told ourselves it had been the storm, the wind playing tricks on us. But when we checked the list of houses we'd visited, the last address wasn't there. There was no record of that house, no flickering candle in its window, and no trace of the footsteps we had left in the snow. To this day, I don't go caroling. And I never, ever listen to Silent Night. Snowstorms bring peace to the mountains, but sometimes they bring more than that. Sometimes they carry shadows that you can't explain and can't escape. Last Christmas, my uncle invited us to his remote cabin in the Rockies. It was a postcard-perfect setting, with its snow-covered trees and a cozy fire crackling in the hearth. The first 2 days were idyllic. We played in the snow, baked cookies, and stayed up late watching holiday movies while the wind howled outside. By Christmas Eve, the weather had turned. A snowstorm rolled in, heavier than anyone had predicted. My uncle shrugged it off, saying we'd be fine as long as we stayed inside. He wasn't worried. I wish I could say the same. That night, as the storm reached its peak, the power went out. The fire was our only source of light, casting flickering shadows across the room. We huddled around it, wrapped in blankets, trying to make the best of things. My uncle told old Christmas stories, the kind meant to make you laugh and forget about the raging storm outside. But then, above the wind, we heard it. A loud thud on the roof. We all froze. "Just snow," my uncle said, though his voice wavered slightly. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe that. The thuds continued, irregular and heavy, like something, or someone, was walking up there. The sound moved across the roof, stopping right above us. My little brother whimpered, and my uncle put a finger to his lips, signaling for us to be quiet. Suddenly, there was a scratching sound. Long, deliberate, and slow, it scraped down the side of the cabin. My uncle grabbed the fireplace poker and crept toward the door, motioning for us to stay back. He peeked out the window, but the snow was falling so heavily that it was impossible to see more than a few feet. "It's nothing," he said, though he didn't put down the poker. The scratching stopped, but something worse took its place. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was too deep, too deliberate. "We're staying inside," my uncle said firmly, locking the door and checking the windows. "No one opens this, no matter what." For a while, the noise stopped. We thought maybe whatever it was had left. But then came the tapping. It started on the front door, light at first, then more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. We all stared at the door, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. My uncle motioned for us to stay quiet, but then we heard a voice. "Let me in," it said. It was a man's voice, calm and clear, as if he were standing right outside. But there was something wrong with it. Something hollow. "Please," the voice said again. "I'm cold. I'm lost. Let me in." My uncle didn't move. None of us did. We were paralyzed, caught between fear and the deeply ingrained instinct to help someone in need. Then the voice changed. "Let me in." It was louder now, deeper, almost a growl. When no one answered, it began pounding on the door, the wood rattling in its frame. My uncle stood his ground, clutching the poker like a lifeline. The pounding grew louder, more violent, until it stopped abruptly. Silence fell. For a moment, we thought it was over. Then the voice came again, but this time it was behind us, right outside the window. "Let me in," we screamed. My uncle rushed to the window, yanking the curtains closed. But as he did, I caught a glimpse of something. It wasn't a man. It was tall, with twisted limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its mouth was too wide, filled with sharp, glistening teeth. The growling returned, circling the cabin like a predator stalking its prey. It scratched at the walls, banged on the windows, and rattled the doorknob. For hours, we sat there, huddled together, jumping at every sound. By dawn, the storm had passed. When we finally worked up the courage to step outside, the snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. But the scratches on the walls and the deep gouges in the door told a different story. We never went back to that cabin. And every Christmas since, I've avoided snowy, remote places, because now I know that not everything outside in a storm is natural. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more.